I'm going to talk about how I created a stained glass window. It started out with the idea to create some privacy for a window which sat in a stairwell. I thought, oh, I'll try and do some faux stained glass windows, create a little bit of interest there, and also to give me some privacy. The subjects for the windows was also another consideration. I thought about it quite a bit, tried a couple of different options, and eventually I decided to use a painting that I already had as the basis for the design. This painting was painted quite a while back. It was really at the start of my oil painting career. Painting is of Ben Bulben, which is a mountain close by the town in Sligo where I grew up. The dimensions of the painting meant that it would only suit one of the windows. I still had a second pane. The second subject for the windows is a part of the same mountain system, but the other side, which is in Leitrim. The part we're capturing is Eagle's Rock. So I wanted to break up the images into simple shapes. I thought about doing something more mosaic-like, more regular, just didn't feel right, so I ended up just carving them up into sections. I wanted them reasonably large patches of colour to make it easy to make the window. In terms of the colour scheme, I stuck pretty close to the colour scheme for the Ben Bulben painting, and then I just figured I'd just match that with the second window, which would have the Eagle's Rock. The process itself was taking the images and then just breaking them down into these sections and then carefully working out what the lines would be, because that would essentially be the trace path for all the leading that was going to go on these windows. Then I also had to think about the dimensions of the window and make sure that what I designed was going to fit within that space. Once I had worked the images up, I printed them out, one version in black and white and one version in colour. The black and white version was to sit as the template underneath the Perspex. The colour was my colour guide as I was painting. The lead strips I bought 6mm lead strip. It's a 50-meter roll, and the lead itself is very flexible and it's got an adhesive backing on it. So to apply the lead to the Perspex, all I had to do was peel back the adhesive tape there and then just stick the lead down on the Perspex. For the Perspex itself, I bought 3mm thick Perspex, and I measured the windows and requested that the people I bought it from offered a service to cut it, so that was great. So I got them to cut it to the size, and they gave me the offcuts from I think they were 1 meter size sheets. So I ended up getting 2 Perspex sheets, 3mm that are cut just for the shape of the window. The other piece of equipment I needed was this little spodger here, which is to help me seal the lead down on the Perspex. And this is just a handle from a plastic cutlery set. It was just the right shape and size to help me do the job, and the advantage with it was that I could just easily get the lead and move it into place. To make sure there was perfect contact between the lead and the Perspex was important, because I was going to end up pouring liquid paint in there. So I needed to make sure it was going to stick down properly. The lead was very forgiving to work with as well. As you can see, it was actually possible to peel it back up and replace it if it didn't go in this, if I changed my mind about placement at some point during the creation of the leading layer. So that was all the key materials. Now, the lead I bought was 6mm, and when I looked at the design and figured out what the properties of the lead were, I realized I would have to cut it into thinner strips to allow me to move around all the curves that were present in the design. Now, if I'd gone for a more mosaic square design, that probably wouldn't have been an issue. But nonetheless, the other advantage of doing this was it was going to reduce the weight of the whole thing by almost half, because the lead is almost 100% lead and it is quite heavy. And the lead, you could cut it quite easily to get the shapes and sizes that you wanted. and just stick them down. So yeah, it was reasonably easy to work with, a little bit fiddly, but nothing difficult. I chose that tape option ahead of the liquid lead just because of the large area I had to cover, and I knew the liquid lead is quite difficult to apply evenly. For the amount I had to add, it was just made more sense to go for the strips, and I think it was a good choice after I completed the work. So here's me starting off adding the strips to the template. Now you can see that I have to use relatively short strips, and there's still quite a bit of manipulation to move the lead and to shape it in the direction I wanted. I started off wearing gloves, and I have to say I just couldn't complete the work with the gloves on. It was just too difficult, and I made a decision to remove them and to just use my bare hands, which is not a good thing to do. The lead is lead, and it's a heavy metal, and it's toxic, builds up in your system. I was very conscious that I was working with the lead, so I made sure to clean my hands regularly before I went away and touched anything else after I completed a session with this work. So I'm just going to show you how the work progressed. I had already created the Bembulban leading and painting by this point, so this was the second window I was attempting with this procedure. Kind of knew what I had to achieve with the leading. For me, the important thing was to create a pattern and lay the lead down so that I minimize the amount of free ends of lead that were there. So you can see I've got multiple lines laid out there. The idea then was to come back with one single strip of lead and move that to cover all the exposed ends of all those lines, and that way I could minimize the total number of exposed lines at the end, because remember, the idea was to create a sealed environment to load the paint into. So these are effectively tiny little wells for the paint to sit in. I wanted to minimize the amount and chance of leaks. So the process was to lay the lead down carefully, manipulate it into the spaces, and then take the blue handle there, press the lead into the Perspex to try and get it to make a seal. Process itself, I grossly underestimated how much actual physical work this was going to take, and I think I had originally budgeted like a day for each one of these, which is really, really ambitious. The pace I'm working at is kind of the paces I had to work at, because I had to work out where I was going to put the lead to do that maths to try and minimize the amount of exposed ends that were going to be in that layer at the end of the whole piece of work. Working at this pace, you're talking, it probably took me about 2 days, day and a half to do just the lead on each one of these images. I'll speed it up, and you can watch the process of all that lead being laid down, and it finishes with me laying down the large lengths of lead to seal off all the edges. Okay, so when we finish the leading, I'll come back and we'll talk about the next steps. And here we are at the end of the process. What I've done here is just gone through the whole image again, pressing down the lead, making sure that it's all making good contact with the Perspex, trimming off any loose bits. There was a lot of small detail right at the bottom of the image, which took a little bit of time and finessing, and I wanted to make sure that everything was sealed off there. So I took time just to go through everything again and make sure it was all pressed as flat as possible. This is the last of the lead work, so just making sure that all the edges there are secure and as tight as I can get them. So the lead, as you press on it, will flatten out and create a good seal. It is quite soft. I think that's it. I think that's the last of that work. So now we're into the painting. The paint that I opted to use for this was this specialized paint. You can see it's got a number of hazards associated with it, so using it with some care. I was in a large room and I used gloves throughout this process. But the advantage of this paint was that it's for glass and tile, and it's designed specifically for this purpose. I know some people use glue and acrylic paint. The paint we're using is for this kind of task, and I bought a range of colors that I knew were going to fit with the palette we had chosen. So I also bought a number of these bottles of colorless paints, and I was going to use them as a base to mix the rest of the paints I required. So you see, I think I ended up with needing 4 of them. And then I had a range of colors: a dark blue, a sky blue, a dark orange, kind of an ochre color, a bright yellow, a sort of lemon yellow. I had quite a strong, vibrant red. And I also bought this opaque paint as well. So it's in the same medium, but it is actually not transparent, it is opaque. And the idea was I was going to use that as well to mix in with the paints. I also, when I was using these paints, I just used regular paint brushes. I wasn't too fussy. This is just a synthetic kind of acrylic brush. And I used a couple of them. I used a small one and a larger one when we got into, depending on whether we were using large or smaller areas. So as I said, this is the second painting that I had done with this medium. So you can see I moved in quite quickly. The idea here was to paint the edge of the area first and then fill in the rest with paint, and not to flood the area completely, but you definitely wanted to add enough paint to cover the area, make sure that there were no gaps. So what I did for this, what approach I used was to mix up color. So this would have been a mixture of that transparent paint and some blue. And then I would have applied it to a couple of different areas. The color print of the painting was useful here. I used that as a key, and then that meant that I could fill in the colors using it. And there you can see what I'm doing is mixing up some more paint. I think it's going to be a darker color here. So in those wells, I already have some of the transparent paint already in the well, and then I just add the color. The paints themselves stayed active for a reasonably long time. I wasn't worried about them drying out. They're quite sticky, gooey. And I put the palette on a little piece of plastic there just to stop or minimize the amount of drips, because essentially what I was doing was filling up the area with the paint. I wasn't actually applying it with the brush. I was using the brush to transfer the paint from the palette to the site where I needed it. And this part of the process was a little bit faster than the leading. I was able to get quite a bit of this done reasonably quickly. There were some things that I figured out were important to look at, and it's probably a recommendation I would make to anyone if they were going to attempt this kind of approach themselves, is to plan your painting. I would recommend painting in the darker paints first, placing them all across the image, paint in all the dark areas, and then come back and put in your lighter ones, because as you can see there, what I'm doing is mopping up some leaks that have come from the area I filled. Now the paint does eventually dry and harden quite, eventually, so the leaks stop, but by doing the process in parts and allowing the paint to dry in that section means that the risk of leaks is much, much reduced, because cleaning up a leaked paint that has leaked into another area where you don't want it is actually really difficult with these paints. So as I said, my advice to anyone trying to do this is to do it in parts. Paint in one set of paints, let it dry, clean up all your leaks, clean up the area around it, and then proceed with the next color. And that will seriously reduce your risk of contaminating other areas with that paint. It did prove to be a very big issue, particularly when I came to painting the areas that I had designated for the white. So that the paint I showed you that was cloudy, opaque, that paint I used for some directly without any thinning, which was actually a mistake. It's not something I would recommend. But when I did use it, I used it directly and filled the areas, and any leaks of other paints into that paint were really, really difficult to control and to clean up. I actually ended up having to remove whole areas that I had painted, and I had to do it before the paint dried, because once the paint dries you will not be able to move it again. So it was a lot of work cleaning up any contaminated areas. So if I was doing this again, I would not use that opaque paint directly. I would have thinned it out with the transparent paint and used it that way. It was way too opaque, and it's a completely different consistency, and it looks very jarringly different from the rest of the image. The idea was okay, I think, to have opaque areas, but to use that paint directly on its own, not a good idea, I think. it would have benefited from being diluted with the transparent paint and created a more cloudy look rather than the solid look that it has in the final image. You'll see that later on. I'll point it out again. So the painting proceeded that way. When I was painting, because I was took the approach of painting sections rather than individual colors. I started at the top and moved down towards the bottom. It was a little bit faster than when I was leading, but I was conscious that there were occasions when I had to stop and clean up areas where there was flooding into other painted areas, and it was very challenging to correct that. So that's why I say, if you can avoid it by allowing the painted areas to dry before you embark on filling the adjacent area, that will seriously reduce the risks and the amount of time and work it takes to clean out an area and reset it for painting again. So I think that's all I have to say about this for the moment. What I'll do is I'll just let this film run and you'll see me completing the rest of the image pretty much in the same fashion as this. Now I'm zooming in on the image just so you can see how it ended up. You can see how all the paint leveled out. I didn't have too many problems with bubbles. It wasn't an issue. I thought it might be, but it wasn't. You can see those opaque areas filled with white, quite large, and yeah, I wouldn't have done it that way again. I would have mixed it in with the other paint, with the clear paint, to give a more cloudy effect. Other than that, everything proceeded relatively easily, and I didn't have, after painting in those clouds, I don't think I had too many issues with leaking areas outside of that. Just had to be careful to clean the paint away from any of the leading if it got on it, because as I said, once it dries, very difficult to remove. That was the final image transferred onto the Perspex. The next part of the process is to think about how we're going to actually mount the finished faux glass on the window. So I didn't want anything permanent, and I did see a solution where somebody had used magnetic strips to hang the painting. Now, I was skeptical whether this was going to work. My concern was, after adding the lead and the paint to the Perspex, the whole thing weighed a lot more than I had originally, so it was a weighty piece of Perspex that I was going to propose to hang on the window. But I'd seen the magnetic strips being used successfully before. The manufacturer suggested that it would be fit for purpose, so I went ahead and bought the magnetic strips. The magnetic strips that I bought came in rolls, and you can see that's how they were sent. And there are two parts. One is the magnet itself, which is flexible, and it comes with an adhesive strip which you peel away and then stick to whatever you're trying to mount. And the second part is the metal itself, which also has an adhesive strip on the back of it. You peel that away and stick it to whatever you're going to mount. So the two of them together, you can see I'm showing there the magnetic, and yeah, there's a significant amount of magnetism there. So I went ahead and applied the metal strip to the Perspex, and the magnetic strip I applied to the window. And that's what you can see there. The black is the magnetic strip. I put it, because it was such a large area and the weight of the window, I figured I needed to attach it to the whole thing. So that's what you can see there. And on the lower window, I wasn't able to put a strip across the top of it, just because of the way the vents for the window were designed. So I ended up just using 3 sides, and it was still successful. It wasn't an issue. So that's the bottom one, and then it was the same approach, taping the top window as well. And there you can see that's the metal strip attached to the Perspex for the lower window. And it goes all the way around, once again, all the way around the outside of the image. So once I had all that done, all I had to do was basically just attach them, just drop them in, and they stuck really well. And there was still enough, I still had the ability to maneuver them just to center them and get them placed just so. So that's what they looked like. The second one, the one you haven't seen me make, was the Bembulban painting, and that's it in situ in the window. And you can see the sunshine. When the sunshine does shine through, you get that great stained glass shadow on the wall. So this was them mounted just straight away after painting them. And yeah, it was great just to see something in the window rather than just that bare look that they had. And yeah, it adds an awful lot to that area. As you can see, the opaque paint, there's absolutely no light coming through there. Probably not the best thing, to be quite honest. I should have mixed them. That's probably my biggest regret about how I approached this. Then this is the same windows almost a year later. I just wanted to show that, yeah, the paint does fade. So a lot of the blues and greens have merged and become closer together in colour. They're not quite as strong. You can see the white is still there. Everything became a little bit more sun faded for sure, but it's still noticeable. It's still doing what it's supposed to be doing. It actually looks a little bit better now, to be quite honest, I think, in some ways. So that was it. That was the whole process of the faux stained glass windows. So that is the story of how I made these faux stained glass windows. Quite epic. Probably should have done something smaller first to learn some of the tricks and things to watch out for. But at the same time, I just needed to get that space filled. So that pushed me forward into making them. I think they turned out okay. I would consider going back again and making a different design for them to see how that would work out. Try something a little bit more regular, repeating pattern. Might be fun to see how that would work. I suspect it might be slightly easier. So it'd be fun to try another pattern and something a bit more regular, repeating, to see how that would work. I suspect it might be a little bit easier than what I chose to do. At the same time, though, those have a little bit of resonance for me as well. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. That was quite an epic video for me to make. I really would appreciate if you'd hit the like and subscribe. I can't guarantee I'll be making too many more faux glass windows. If you're interested in some of the other work I do 3D modeling and illustration work, and I have a couple of videos about that on here as well. So if you're interested, you can check those out. If you're interested in commissioning, I'm always open. I'd be happy to talk with you about any projects you might have. So thanks. Bye bye.